afternoon. Thank you for joining UWSP's second virtual town hall meeting to cover important topics related to the pandemic. I'm Lana Poole, your moderator. Today, we will hear from the following panelists before taking questions. Chancellor Bernie Patterson, Dr. Helen Luce, Director of Student Health Services, Provost Greg Summers, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and then back to Chancellor Patterson before the Q&A. Also joining us for the Q&A, Christina Rickert, Interim Chief Financial Officer, Eric Ressler, Chief Human Resources Officer, Al Thompson, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, and now, Chancellor, to you.
Thank you, Lana. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be brief today. At the May Board of Regents meeting, you heard from 4 chancellors: Madison, Milwaukee, Parkside, and Eau Claire. The other chancellors were scheduled to also talk with the regents during their closed session. That session was canceled at the very last minute. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to share with you this afternoon what I wanted to say to the Board of Regents. Of course, I was going to talk about our budget deficits and travel freezes and furloughs, the same thing that all the other chancellors did talk about that afternoon. But I wanted to focus on the human cost of the pandemic. For our students, this meant learning how to learn in a new way. That had to be stressful. For our students, for many of them, it meant a loss of a job, particularly if they work in the food industry. Many of them struggled to pay rent and utilities, and they had serious concerns about family members, many of which could not return home because of those concerns. And for our faculty and our staff, having to convert classes to online instruction in a matter of 2 weeks had to have been stressful. And then there's the furloughs and the loss of income. That's stressful. And our colleagues at the lower end of the salary scale were especially stressed. But the point I want to make this afternoon, and the point I wanted to make with the regents, is simply this. When you have devoted your entire career to helping students succeed in the classroom or in the advising office or in any of the other support services, both in the classroom and beyond. And then all at once you're met with unimaginable challenges that you've never prepared for, never even imagined. And you want to help the students and you know what you need to do and you can't. This is a different kind of stress. This is something you've not experienced in the past. I want to remind the regents that our campus has shared a collective tear over the human cost of this pandemic, and that it would be a mistake to focus exclusively on the numbers. I will look for other opportunities to deliver this message to our regents. But for now, let me turn this over to Dr. Helen Luce, our resident physician on staff.
Thank you, Chancellor. Good afternoon. My name is Helen Luce. I'm the Medical Director for Student Health Service on campus, and I've been directly involved with our Emergency Operations Center and the Long-Term Planning Group as we're looking towards late summer and fall, making plans for reopening. So I just wanted to share a little bit of information about that. And I would like to first remind everyone that certainly in student health, our priority, our mission is the health and safety of our students. But in terms of the entire Emergency Operations Committee and the Long-Term Planning Committee and this group that's on the panel today, our priority is the health and safety not only of our UWSP community, the students, faculty, and staff, but also the local communities where our campuses reside. So we're taking all of those things into consideration as we're looking towards the future as well. This virus that we're dealing with right now is going to be here a while. And I think that's a hard thing for all of us to kind of get our heads around. We need to learn how to live with it. And that's kind of the difficulty in the process that we're working through right now. Until we have a vaccine available or a therapeutic medication to treat it, the best way that we can slow the spread of the virus is still physical distancing, practicing good hygiene, wearing cloth face coverings when in public, disinfecting common areas and high touch surfaces, and staying home when we're sick. The one area that I think we've all heard those messages before, but I just wanted to review that. The one that I would want to focus on a little bit here is the cloth face coverings, just to let people know that UWSP has ordered enough cloth face coverings so that each employee will be provided with 2 cloth face coverings, and then also tension relief bands, which are being produced on campus. And in case some of you are not familiar, this is kind of what they look like. And so it's to take the pressure off the back of the ear when you're wearing a mask or a cloth face covering. And those are going to be part of our plan coming back, and those are strongly recommended for people to wear on campus. When we're looking at the long-term planning, there are 6 broad sets of issues that we're looking at that need to be addressed and try to find solutions before we can safely and responsibly reopen campus. I'm going to review 3 of those, and then I'll turn it over to our provost, Greg Summers, who will cover the other 3. First, we must have the ability to regularly test our students, faculty, and staff so that we can identify and trace potential outbreaks. This is critical that we're able to identify the virus when we have it on campus. We're looking at options both through UW System, partnering potentially with UW Health, and then also looking at options for possibly partnering with local healthcare systems for testing capacity on our campuses. But just to reiterate, there's been no final decisions made in that area either on how that's going to progress for fall. Those are things we're working on. Secondly, we must safely manage positive cases once they've been identified on our campus. This will include students, faculty, and staff. We're currently adjusting our isolation and quarantine plans for fall. We did have plans in place for spring, and those now need to be adjusted with our fall reopening plans. We're specifically focusing on partnering with our local public health department regarding isolation. And isolation is where you have someone who has a positive COVID result, a positive case. They need to be separated from other people who are not ill. So that will be where they will need to be isolated. Quarantine is where you have someone who is not sick, but needs to be separated because they potentially were exposed to someone who was identified as having COVID. So those are the 2 different plans that we need to put in place for once we have some positive cases that we need to work through. And third, we must consider our UWSP community's impact on the local communities where we reside. We all pose a risk to carry the virus to campus. We all go different places, whether we live in a different county, or even a different part of the city. But then also we can bring that to campus, but then also from campus, we can take that back out to our communities. So we have to work on education for our students, our faculty, and staff so that everyone understands the risks involved and how we can decrease the risk of exposing our family and our other community members to this virus. And on that note, I will turn it over to our provost, Greg Summers.
So thanks very much, Helen, and good afternoon, everyone. Before I review the 3 areas that are sort of campus-based, I wanted to say a quick but very genuine thank you to the dozens of people who've been involved in helping us plan, not only the folks in academic affairs, but across campus who've been participating in our numerous work groups. They've been providing a lot of thoughtful, innovative, creative input and asking a lot of good, hard questions and helping us to think through these issues. So thanks to all of those folks. Given the health implications that Helen just outlined, I think the most certain thing that we can say about the fall semester is that even under the best of circumstances, it's not going to feel entirely normal. And the question is, as Helen noted, how do we live with that virus in an academic setting on a university campus? The 3 broad areas that folks are helping us to think through are all kind of related to that. The first thing that we have to remember is that for all of our campus activities, whether they're instructional or non-instructional, we have to be able to think of ways to provide both in-person and distance opportunities for people to participate. And that's really to protect people's access, to preserve people's access to the campus experiences, again, whether they're teaching-based or the outside the classroom activities. When we think about the classroom, we're going to have to really be careful to maintain appropriate physical distancing in all of those contexts to limit the spread of the virus. And that means several things. It means we're going to have to probably prioritize which experiences are face-to-face and which we provide through some sort of distance mechanism. Things like lab experiences, studio work, field experiences, the things that are difficult to find substitutes for are going to probably be at the top of our priority list as our work groups are thinking through those issues. But we'll need to give strong consideration of that. Things like large lecture courses that can be delivered more easily through distance mechanisms will probably be moved primarily online. And when we do teach in person, as I already indicated, faculty and instructors are going to have to work to provide both in-person teaching and asynchronous online experiences simultaneously, again, to both preserve the access of our students to those experiences, but also to prepare the institution to pivot quickly if our health conditions in our region, our community change quickly in the fall. The final thing I want to point out is that we're going to have to maintain appropriate physical distancing outside the classroom as well. And we're thinking in particular of our residential facilities, dining, our recreational facilities on campus. These probably present some of the most challenging aspects of planning for the fall semester, given the close quarters that those involve and the high contact between students and faculty and staff that sometimes takes place there. And we're going to have to be prepared to significantly modify many of those experiences, many of those campus events and activities, again, to provide distance alternatives where we can, to preserve access, but also to really work hard to limit the spread of the virus wherever possible. So those are the three areas that I have to review, and I'll turn it back to the Chancellor.
Bernie, you are.
I'm mute.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. They're got my back again. So let me start over. I want to update us on where we are with furloughs for a few minutes or a couple of minutes, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Yes, we will have another round of intermittent furloughs, most likely starting in September. We're going to be planning those over the next few weeks, but we want those decisions to be informed as they can be. And there are several factors that are just not knowable yet. That is, for example, will there be another state lapse in FY21? Hopefully we'll learn about that soon. Will our performance-based funding be in jeopardy? We don't know about that yet either. And then, of course, what are our plans for the fall? So while we could have made these decisions a month ago, they would not have been as informed as we think they should be. And so we're trying to get all the pieces in place before we get the details of the next furlough plan out to everybody. But we are expecting that the next intermittent furloughs will have salary bands or salary categories. The higher your salary, the more furlough days you will have. We're also looking at possibility and trying to model out if we could exempt a category of employees at the lowest end of the salary scale. Where that line would be drawn is yet to be determined. And can we exempt those who had consecutive day furloughs? Again, that is still a question that we're examining. Please note that there's a difference between a 1 week, 5 day consecutive day furlough and somebody who had a 90-day or 3 month consecutive day furlough. So we're trying to find equitable distinctions between those categories. There will probably be some fixed days that we will all be on furlough at the same time, and then other days when the employee selects his day with his supervisor's approval. The best example that I can give you for a fixed day furlough would be the day after Thanksgiving or the day after Christmas. We won't be able to do the day after New Year's because New Year's and Christmas are in the same 2 week pay period. So there's that challenge. But we want to have some fixed day furloughs because it will produce some utility savings for the institution, which will be important as well. But when we have a plan on paper, we will be meeting with our shared governance groups, Executive Council of Common Council. I know our contracts will have ended by then, but hopefully we can get a group together, as well as University Staff Council and Academic Staff Council, to get their best thinking on the plan before we publish it as a complete plan. So I wanted to provide that brief update. And now, Lana, back to you.
Okay. Thank you, panelists. Now we will take questions from the audience. To submit a question, please refer to the webpage address that's noted on the background of my screen. We will address as many questions as time permits, but answer all questions on the COVID-19 webpage. So here we go. The first question is for Eric. The FAQs sometimes reference both instructional / teaching academic staff and faculty as faculty and teaching academic staff. And then the reference switches to just faculty. With this in mind, could you clarify how furloughs will be implemented with instructional / teaching academic staff?
You bet. Thank you, Lana. As we just heard from the Chancellor, the furloughs for the academic year have not been fully determined at this point. The leadership team of our university are currently working on what the need for furloughs are, as well as what the selection and the exclusion criteria that would be used. If instructional academic staff are to be furloughed, the days of the furlough would be non-instructional days. But remember, we also have the option of using half-day furloughs. And this should help us better navigate and facilitate the furlough process. I just want to encourage all of our people to continue asking the questions, raising these concerns, and engaging in the development process with the managers and leaders to ensure that we have a workable furlough program. For now, I don't have a definitive answer beyond that. As soon as decisions are made, we'll be reaching out and engaging our colleagues to ensure that we have the best information and that questions and concerns are addressed.
Thank you. The second question is for Christina. Many of our students live in rural areas with poor internet access. If courses are online in any capacity this fall, what resources will UWSP provide those students to ensure they can adequately participate in their education?
Thanks, Lana. With our recent CARES funding, all eligible students received assistance to meet technology needs that resulted from our current disruption on campus. They all received about $150 towards any technology needs that they had. We did hold some of that funding to be able to do a similar process in the fall, should it be needed, based on whatever planning we have yet to come up with for the fall. But we do have some of those dollars available for that in the fall as well. Also for the summer, and I know this isn't specifically in the question, but for the summer, because we do have summer classes and those are online as well, IT does have some cellular hotspots. It is limited, that is available as well, and those will be also available in the fall too. So we do have some available options that the students have for them, whether it's the hotspots or some additional funding. So I encourage them to continue to reach out to the emergency grant assistance and request some dollars should it be needed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next one is for Greg. According to the provost, we must prepare to offer in-person and online learning simultaneously. Does that mean that every class led by every faculty member needs to be prepared to simultaneously teach the same course online and in person? Or does that mean that the entire campus will provide a mix of in-person and online learning?
Thanks, Lana. The recommendation we've gotten from our work group is that should apply to the individual instructor, not necessarily to the campus. And the reason is, again, to ensure that we have access for our students. We will have students with underlying health conditions that will not feel comfortable attending class in person. And so we really are hoping to maximize the opportunities that those students have.
Okay. And another question for you, Greg. For teaching staff who are high risk, will there be options for fully online if the campus goes back to face-to-face?
Yeah, the short answer is absolutely yes. For the exact same reasons, we certainly know that some faculty members will not be able to teach in person under these circumstances, and so we'll be working with those individuals to ensure that they can teach at a distance.
Okay. So, question for Eric, in line with the last question, in the event that a high-risk teacher moves to online teaching while the campus goes back to face-to-face learning, will he or she have to request ADA accommodations?
Thank you, Lana. Well, as I understand the question is whether staff who may be high risk for COVID-19 would need an Americans with Disabilities Act accommodation to not return to work? And the answer is that accommodations under ADA have not changed. If an employee needs a reasonable accommodation due to a qualifying disability, the employee will need to go through the process of accommodation by contacting my office. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has specifically provided guidance to employers on ADA and COVID-19 that we are going to adhere to. If physical presence is required of the person to perform their duties, whether it's teaching or in other capacities on campus, and a reasonable accommodation cannot be implemented, then we have to look at what are our alternatives at that point. However, we need to keep in mind that every case is individual, and we will do everything we can to provide the services required of our university while also working with our people to keep them safe. Online or working remotely are not the only acceptable accommodations that we could consider in such cases. So we need to keep in mind that we're going to be encouraging our people to think creatively and to apply evidence-based practices where they are available to ensure the health and safety of our entire university.
Lana, may I ask Eric a question, please?
Absolutely.
This is going to be pretty laid back here. Eric, if a faculty member has some underlying conditions that are concerned about that Greg just spoke about, could that person, in consultation with their dean and the provost, just arrange to teach online without going through an ADA application process?
They certainly could, but if there were concerns, let's say it were a lab or a more hands-on environment where academic affairs said, we're going to have to see what an accommodation looks like, they can certainly go through that accommodation process, and we would encourage them to do so. Okay, the accommodation process protects the organization as well as the employee, but if we can come up to amicable agreements that work, absolutely, let's do that.
Very good. Christina, this one's for you. Administrative assistants are the first point of contact for students and visitors to our departments, and it's difficult to keep a distance. When campus does reopen and we're all required to be in our offices again, will front desks have plexiglass dividers in place to help protect employees?
Good question. We actually just pushed through our initial order of plexiglass, and there's folks on campus in our facilities area that's doing an initial assessment of where we might have needs for a shield, like a sneeze shield, I think they're calling them. And once that's identified, those spaces on campus are identified, facilities will roll out an implementation plan to get those set up and implemented before we reopen in the fall. So we have started the planning process for that, and orders have been placed. So everything is progressing in that area. So good question. Yep.
Al, what will the plan be for students living in the dorms in the fall, and will they have single rooms?
Well, thank you, Lana. I think what we're facing right now, and Greg and Helen already kind of touched upon it, is that it will be very difficult as we move back into the fall, how students are going to live, eat, recreate, all the above. We have several plans. We have a plan that would house 3,000 students, which means students would have doubles, but then those students who have underlying conditions would be singles. We have a plan where we just give everybody a single, which is about 1,900 students. So there's a range, and I think whatever dial we turn it to, we have to be very sensitive to the students' health and safety. I mean, that's critical that we have the testing, tracking and tracing students where they are. And when we do have students who are ill, where to locate them so that they can recover, either in their rooms, or do we set aside certain parts of the floor, a certain floor in each building for students who are ill. So there's a lot of options, a lot of plans. I agree that we have some really outstanding groups working on it and mapping out various options. And I think the policy group, as we look at those, will have to make some good decisions on that.
Very good. The next one is for Dr. Luce. Will students have their temperatures taken on a regular basis, and will they be allowed to have visitors?
Thank you, Lana. So temperature taking is something that is currently being required or highly recommended, I guess, from the CDC for healthcare facilities. So in student health, we have been monitoring employee temperatures on a daily basis at the beginning of our day for the last 2 months. In other places like businesses and schools, that guidance has yet to be firmed up. There's no clear recommendation that is necessary, and obviously there could be some challenges to trying to get everyone's temperature on a daily basis. So I guess the short answer is no, there hasn't been a final decision made because there's not clear guidance yet on that topic. Will they be allowed to have visitors? I'm assuming that's in the residence halls. And I think that discussion, I know in a couple of the work groups that I'm in, that has been a hot topic on how to address that. And I know we've been looking at what other campuses in the UW system are putting in place for visitor policies, as well as colleges throughout the country. So it is definitely an area that we're looking at, but again, no decision has yet been made on that.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is for Greg and Dr. Luce. What is the plan for bringing faculty and staff back to work on campus? And then will faculty and staff need to have their temperatures taken? And will faculty and staff need to wear masks?
So I guess I'll start, Lana. We are still working on the plan to transition faculty and staff back into some regular access to campus. That's a topic that we're talking through this week, and we're hoping to get a communication out to the campus about that with the court decision on the safer at home order from the governor now rendering that order ineffective. We are considering how to transition that, and I think beginning in June we'll begin to allow some more regular access of folks back to campus, but we're still talking about under what conditions and what are the gating criteria we will follow. And then those health related questions about masks and things of that sort, I'll allow Helen to respond to.
Sure. Thank you, Greg. Yep, so I think the same answer in terms of the temperature taking applies to faculty staff as it does to students, that is something that we're having ongoing discussions about. Again, the pros and cons with requiring that and how to institute that and monitoring of those temperatures. So no final decision has been made on the temperature taking for faculty staff either. And then in terms of will we need to wear masks, the current recommendation from the chancellor is that it is strongly encouraged for everyone who's on campus to wear a cloth face covering. So there are certain areas on campus where the work that the person has to do requires a higher level of PPE, and cloth face coverings are not meant to replace that. So certainly if your work, such as in healthcare, when we're doing direct patient care, we are using an N95 mask. So we would not wear a cloth face covering in that situation. But for faculty and staff who are in maybe public areas, are not alone in their office, that is where it's being strongly encouraged to wear a cloth face covering.
Eric, with the possibility of student services being reduced, is it likely there will be layoffs after July 15th?
Well, I appreciate the question in the manner in which it's asked. I don't believe any of our panelists have that crystal ball that's going to be able to help us foretell what layoffs may need to occur. However, I also feel that the question is asked with a bit of urgency and angst. And I want to ensure that we're working on a number of creative solutions to reduce or eliminate the need for layoffs. The first of the solutions was the furlough process. Both the intermittent and consecutive days were designed to save us funds as an institution so that we wouldn't have to resort to layoffs. It came at a time when people could get unemployment benefits without waiting periods and have an additional benefit as a result of the CARES Act. The next solution that we have in line is reducing or eliminating the need for layoffs is that work share program that I had talked to supervisors and departments about yesterday. And this tool works similarly to furloughs, but it's approved through DWD, Department of Workforce Development, and the benefits are also funded through the CARES Act, and it allows a department or unit to share the remaining work among their employees. It's one of those programs that is specifically designed to curtail the need for layoffs. So as far as layoffs that may be needed beyond these tools, I don't think we have any specific plans at this point that are in this question. If work is going away due to restructuring or due to a loss of program funding, we could expect that there will probably be layoffs in those areas. But if an area expects their employees to return back to work, the work share program or consecutive day furloughs are a much better option for managing that.
And on the heels of that question, if there are layoffs, will those facing layoff get preferential treatment, such as a higher likelihood of being rehired for other on-campus jobs to which they apply?
Sure, and I think even originally we had seen the question asking about preferential treatment on layoffs, and those ideas certainly have merits. I want to remind everyone that the layoff selection criteria is spelled out in the university handbook, as well as Wisconsin Administrative Code. So neither of these tools provide us a selection criteria that we can override based on lifestyle or even household need. We're bound to follow the rules where layoffs are considered. But past layoffs from departments have been highly scrutinized and don't simply just get a pass. Now, I want to remind all of our people that we do have a program that the chancellor, when I first started, encouraged us to create, and that is the early consideration for vacant programs or vacant positions programs. So this allows people to who are qualified for an open position and have been reduced due to budget reasons in their current position to apply in a non-competitive basis for them. You still have to be qualified to do the work, but we don't have to go through the full recruitment process. And it has been successfully implemented in the past. So it's a good program and we want to keep doing that. There are some other protections that we have for university staff and academic staff. And those are the prevention of refilling a position for 3 years or reassigning those duties. We make sure that those provisions and protections are always in place for our people.
Very good. Al, are we allowed to host a conference on campus for 35 people?
I think at this very moment, the answer would be no. We are relying on the bounce back plan as our framework. While it might not be what's authority, we use it as our framework of determining. And so what I've been informing folks that are asking that question right now, at best, we're looking at 10 people. Maybe in July, August, we might get up to 50, but I can't promise that. And so what I would ask people, especially those program revenue type events, you should do a cost benefit analysis anyway to know if you have such a low number, will it be even worth doing because you're going to be losing money. But also follow up, we will continue to update the campus, hopefully almost on a weekly or every 2 weeks where we are, and we'll give them up-to-date information. So for these events that people are talking about, conferences, weddings, or other type of events, we're going day by day, but letting the folks who are wanting to organize it, the reality of the number that they can have at the event.
Okay. And the next series of questions go to Dr. Luce, and they're concerning testing, more versions of the testing questions. Who will be administering the COVID tests? How will the university go about testing an entire campus community? How often should students, employees expect to be tested? And what happens if a student or employee refuses to be tested?
Yes, thank you. Those are all very good questions. And I think all of us on this panel are asking those same questions ourselves. We don't have a definite plan on that yet. I know there was some publicity about President Ray Cross announcing that the entire UW system was going to be testing before people came back to campus in fall. There isn't really a definite plan on how that's going to take place yet. So we're working out some of those details. As I said earlier, we're looking at the possibility that UW system, maybe in partnership with UW Health, maybe offering some plan for testing on all of the campuses. We don't have any definite information yet on that. We're also looking at the possibility of a partnership with a local healthcare organization that could help us accomplish that as well. So again, to be determined yet on the administering, who's going to be doing it and how that would take place for the entire campus community and how often. Those are all very good questions that we don't quite have answers for yet. In terms of refusing to be tested, that's a very good question as well, something that we haven't really addressed yet in our planning group. I think that would be one of those things we address as we get to the point of, if we're going to test everyone, if that is something we're going to make happen at the beginning, then we would have to address those possibilities as they come up. If someone declines to be tested.
Fair enough. Greg, when will we know the plan for fall? That is returning in person versus blended learning or online learning?
So as I think I've already indicated, the consensus right now that's emerging from our planning groups is that the most realistic alternative is to aim for some sort of blended experience. And the question will be, how do we, what's the thresholds that we should aim at? Our planning groups are working to finalize recommendations to the chancellor both this week and next. And so we're hoping to have at least a draft plan to the leadership group by next week. And I'm really hopeful that we can communicate something more definitive to the campus by early June.
Okay, very good. Dr. Luce, more questions about face coverings. Will students be required to wear masks in classrooms and other confined environments? And what happens if a student refuses to wear a mask or forgets to bring the mask to class?
Sure, thank you. Yep, and those are good questions as well. As I said earlier, this is not currently a requirement except in the health service area on campus, and that is because we are trying to meet the same guidelines that our healthcare facilities in the community have set up as standards. Otherwise, other public areas on campus, this is a strongly encouraged behavior that you wear a cloth face covering in public areas. And this is to help decrease the risk of transmission to others. So the cloth face covering doesn't protect yourself. You are doing that to try to help protect others in the case that you may be asymptomatic, meaning you don't have any signs of illness yet, but may be already infected and possibly transmitting the virus. So it will not, at this point, has not been determined that that's going to be a requirement for students or faculty or staff at this point. If a student refuses to wear a mask, well, like I said, at this point, this is not a requirement, so it would just be strongly encouraged, so it's not mandatory. We will be, as I said earlier, the university is going to be supplying 2 cloth face coverings to every employee on campus. I don't think a determination has yet been made regarding students and whether we may have some cloth face coverings available or paper disposable masks. We'll have to see what that's part of the long-term planning process as well. So those things will be determined as we go forward.
I just want to tie in. Helen gave a wonderful answer to that, and I want to echo that, but I want to add one other part of the equation. I do feel that this will be a system-wide discussion so that we don't have one campus requiring students to wear masks or face covering, another campus not. I think that will be a decision that needs to be made system-wide. I don't know that, stay tuned to that, but I'm just being honest with you that will be, because if we're talking about students could be disciplined, you got to have it be across the system. You cannot say UWSP is going to discipline a student on face covering, not wearing it, and another campus is not even doing it. So I think it's a broader discussion beyond just UWSP. But Helen's answer was right on. Thank you.
Good point. Chancellor, this one's for you. Has UW System Legal looked at legal ramifications on requiring face coverings? That is, if a student claims it's their constitutional right to not wear a face covering, do they have a legitimate claim?
Thank you, Helen. That question has been submitted to System Legal, and they are looking into that. Initially, they have informed me that students can be required to wear face coverings under certain circumstances, and in others, maybe not. They didn't go into much detail beyond that. I'm guessing that the rules with face coverings in the residence halls would be different than in public areas and in classrooms, because the residence halls are their domicile, that's their home. And so they have certain rights in that environment that would not apply in public areas and in classrooms. But more guidance is coming from System Legal on that point.
Thank you. Greg, for many faculty members, working at home is challenging for a variety of reasons. If the campus goes fully or partially online in the fall, can faculty have some access to offices beyond what is allowed now?
I'm hopeful that that is the case. The current, criteria from the chancellor has been that if we can work at home, we must. As I mentioned earlier, we're in current discussions to see how, with the expiration of the Safer at Home order, we can begin to relax those so that we still want to maintain appropriate physical distancing at all times while on campus. That's going to be a rule for the coming year for sure. But we want to begin to relax our campus restrictions so that people can have access to their offices and to their labs and things of that sort as appropriate for fall preparation and for other reasons.
Okay, very good. The next question is for Eric. Given new advice from UW System on how intermittent furlough days will affect holiday pay, can we submit our planned furlough dates? If so, do we resubmit all dates? And the deadline was this past Monday, May 18th. The chart released in today's message of the day did not make this clear.
So for those who were affected, there were 11 of us. I was one of them. They've all been contacted by me personally to let them know how that would affect them and what changes and alternatives were available to them. The only other holiday that we have coming up is going to be around the New Year's period, where one pay period will end and then another one will pick up. So we will have better guidance on exactly how this is going to go about. I apologize that system made this change, but we truly tried to respond as quickly as possible to ensure that our people were protected and that they didn't lose anything that they didn't plan on losing.
Let me add to that too, Eric and Lana. We found out about this morning. And I've had 2 conversations with general counsel, one with another staff attorney in his office. I've had another conversation with the head of system HR, and they're looking into how this might be navigated. So it's not definite that that's going to be the ruling. They think it is a UW system policy, not a state policy or a state statute that's getting in the way. And a matter of fact, I've already had a call from the general counsel while we've been in this town meeting, and I'm going to call him back as soon as we finish. I think he's going to give me an answer, but everybody should just sit tight for right now, and we'll get word out as soon as we know something more definite.
Okay. Chancellor, has a decision been made regarding the rest of summer? Will campus be open in-person programs or events be allowed on our campus this summer?
We're about to put out some guidance on that in the next few days by the end of next week, where we can slowly begin giving more access and events, smaller groups, perhaps on campus, faculty getting back into research labs and studios gradually, but it's going to be phased in, starting some in June and more in July.
Al, what will events look like for fall, specifically Welcome Week activities?
Currently, the plan is to have everything virtual, online. It'd be very difficult to congregate large groups of students together for Welcome Week. So we're planning for a virtual online type of Welcome Week. We also have once again, we have a lot of groups working on it. We have a group called Social Connections that Dean Gretel Stock and myself and others are working on a plan where we have the academic and first year experience with students advising and connecting with their tutoring areas, combined with the residential living side of it with learning communities. So we're putting together various structures to bring students back, to allow them to be transitioned back into the university. And for the first year experience, that will be also part of that Social Connections group. So I'm pretty pleased where we are. I will say this, and I'll end what I'll just say what I think. There's been such a negative about COVID-19 itself, but the working of this university, working together on many, many things like this, has been very incredible. And I give kudos to everyone who's been involved with it.
Very good. Helen, the next couple of questions are for you. What will events will students also be provided with 2 face masks? And then for the 2 cloth face masks that UWSP will give to employees, will they be equivalent in protection as an N95 mask?
Sure. Good question. So at this point, there hasn't been a decision made about cloth face coverings for students. We were addressing the faculty and staff first, I think, because they're going to be coming back to campus in a phased approach through the later into the summer and before we're looking at fall semester. So I think that is something that the leadership team is considering and looking at. And there'll probably be an announcement as we get a little bit further along. The other question, so in terms of protection, as I said earlier, the cloth face covering is really not intended to provide protection to the individual wearing it. So it's to provide protection to the people that you are around. So the real benefit is when the majority of the people are wearing the cloth face covering. So that helps decrease that transmission. It's not intended to provide protection like an N95 mask. And an N95 mask at this point really should be limited to healthcare providers who are providing direct patient care, like face-to-face care with a risk of transmission, or in certain work environments where an N95 otherwise is indicated for PPE for that individual. There are certain departments on campus where that is true. So that will not change. But in terms of protection, the cloth face covering is really intended more for the protection of the people around you, not for yourself.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Greg, if we do slowly reopen later this summer and fall, what do the visit opportunities look like for prospective students? And are we going to be allowed to have one-on-one visits?
That's a question that we'll have to consider. Our recruitment team really moved proactively when all of this first landed on us institutionally in March to move the majority of their summer activities to a virtual format. So our campus visits related to the STARS registration events and individual and group visits were all moved into this virtual format. And they plan that, as I understand it, primarily through the entirety of summer. Given the relaxation that we're now contemplating, I think we have to go back and reconsider that, but no decisions have been reached as of yet.
Okay, thank you. Eric, this one's for you. In budgeting my paycheck for the next few months, it would be helpful to know how intermittent furlough day pay cuts will be calculated. What is the percentage reduction per pay period for both exempt and non-exempt employees?
Well, for non-exempt, it would simply be the hours that were not worked. So that's a fairly simple calculation. Now, if we're talking about a monthly employee, I don't have those exact calculations, but I'll make sure they're available for the FAQs when we print these on the website.
Okay, thank you. Greg, are there any websites or organizations that you would recommend individual staff and faculty explore to gather ideas about how we can be creative in effectively providing out-of-classroom services for students that have typically been held in group settings?
That's a great question. I know that the team in CITL and also in University College have been gathering resources of that kind and posting them on their websites. So I'd have to review those to see exactly what student services might be alluded to, but I would certainly contact the folks in CITL or University College for a list of resources that they might have. But that's a question I think we need to continue exploring. When we moved online, we did so, on very short notice without much planning and in an emergency. I think it's very clear that as we look at the fall semester and the blended sorts of experiences that we're going to have to continue, we need to get better at doing that sort of distance-related work, both in the classroom and also in areas like advising and tutoring. And so we'll need to be gathering a lot more of those resources.
Okay. Helen, what happens if a student tests positive? Will the instructor have to self-isolate along with the classmates and the dorm mates? And how will that impact learning?
Sure. This is a really important topic. Good question. Thank you for asking it. So this is really what we're trying to do, everything we can to put safety precautions in place to try to decrease that risk of transmission. So if we have a student who tests positive, or in any case, a faculty or staff member who tests positive, immediately that is a reportable disease. So once there is a positive COVID case, it's reportable to the state health department, who then notifies the local public health department. So for here in the main campus, that's Portage County. And we have a close relationship with our Portage County health official and have been in communication with him about how that will work. In terms of identifying specifically who all would have to be in quarantine, that is, there's a process called contact tracing that needs to take place, and that helps to identify the individuals who were in close enough contact for a prolonged period of time that would be at highest risk for exposure, and those would be the folks then who would be put in quarantine. So the contact tracing is done by typically by the local health department, and what they do is they contact the individual who tested positive, and they find out where they've been and who they've been in close contact with in the past few days to a week, and then they determine, try to get contact information for those individuals. And so it's kind of whittling it down basically of how close they were. So that's why we have that 6 foot physical distancing. So if you're not within 6 feet of someone who tests positive, it's really not, you're probably not at risk. You're not going to need to go into quarantine. And even if you are within that 6 foot distance, if you're not within that distance for a prolonged period of time, you're still probably not at risk. So just passing this person in the hallway doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to quarantine. It's really probably we were looking at people who are in close contact. So again, that's why we're trying to put in some of those in our planning for the fall, trying to put in some of those precautions like in the classrooms, probably spacing out the desks or the spaces so that we don't have students having to sit right next to each other, that they can observe that physical distancing. The people who are probably the most at risk are going to be roommates or close friends, people who they've been in that kind of close contact with.
Very good. Al, when will we know if students will be able to live in the residence halls? And what are some of the strategies we're considering to maintain social distancing in the halls?
We should be getting out information about students. We have students already have applied for housing. We have about 2,400 students that have applied for housing on the main campus. And so we'll be getting that information out later in June. We still need to make sure the model we're using for single versus double, because when we send out room assignments, we have collected some interesting data that students who are wanting to come back in the halls, returning as well as new students, have a large number of them have a preference of having a roommate. There is a preference to be in contact with someone else in the same room. As for steps, we're going to put plexiglass at the opening desk, the first floor desk. There'll be plexiglass up. There will be various markings on the floor about keeping distance, keeping the bathrooms clean, continuously keeping them wiped down. Students will have responsibility to wipe those fixtures down after their use. And then we'll have educational programs at length about how to try to social distance in the residence hall. But Helen makes a good point again, someone gets ill, it kind of brings a whole nother chapter into the book that we have to figure out.
Christina, to what extent will savings from furlough days and federal stimulus money help offset the current campus budget deficit?
They certainly help. The furlough savings as well as the stimulus dollars, they do help, but unfortunately we are accruing more shortfall than we are having money to put against that shortfall. So we will continue to utilize the savings we have on discretionary spend and travel. We'll continue to look at other ways, and like Eric alluded to, creative ways to try to come up with the deficit savings or the shortfall savings that we need. Enrollment will be a big picture. We'll have to determine what our enrollment's going to look like in fall, because that could make a big swing on where our budget falls. As the chancellor alluded to, we have to have some data from the state to help us inform where our fall picture is going to be as well. If we'll have an additional lapse or other information from the state will help inform too. So while those furlough savings definitely help, as well as the stimulus dollars, it's not going to make us whole. So we'll have to continue to work on it. And it's going to take, in my opinion, it's going to take a couple years to help us make us whole. So we'll have, we're working on a plan. I'm working on a 5-year plan to help that. So it will continue. We'll continue to plan it out.
Eric, how difficult will it be to change a furlough day that's already been approved? For example, a scheduled furlough day after a scheduled holiday that will result in a loss of holiday pay.
You bet. The best way to go in and do that is to go into that eForms page on the HR website. And of course, it'll be in the FAQs that we print after this session, and do a new form, because that will replace the old form that was originally approved. Those that I contacted earlier, we have a different process in place because of the urgency of the matter. But I would caution you to, because the only other one that is coming up is on the January 1st. So if you're not one of those 10 people I contacted, you don't have this issue coming up on your furloughs. I've already verified that, at least not through the approved furloughs. But if you do want to change a furlough day, the best way is to go in to the eForms, re-enter a new one and get it approved, and that will stand instead over the one that had previously been approved.
Just a reminder, everyone, to sit tight before you make those changes, and we'll find out probably later today if that's going to be necessary.
I'm going to take the next question. And the question is, given the current situation, how are we modifying university marketing to persuade and encourage students to choose the four-year college experience in comparison to a technical degree? And what I would say to that is that, having recently gone through the branding exercise, we have a really good solid brand platform to stand on that resonates well during this time. And it's perseverance, and it's not putting the quest to find your purpose on hold. Now is the time to find your career and to discover your purpose. So I don't know that we change our brand and our overall messaging. I think we adapt it to the times that we live in, but I think it's very relevant, and it's fortunate for University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point that we have gone through branding, because I think we're now postured well to reflect that brand in the environment in which we live. And we have time for one more question, and then I'll turn it over to Chancellor Patterson. The final question is for Christina. Will there be any financial compensation for faculty and staff who are or will be working from home and using their existing or added high-speed internet modem, as well as additional electricity?
If I understand correctly, so they're like an additional stipend, I think, if I'm understanding. At this time, there's not been any discussions for additional stipends. It's like the first time the question's been posed to me, but there hasn't been any questions that I've heard. I think that'd be something we'd have to discuss, but I have not had that conversation with the leadership group. That hasn't been posed before. So I think if that's something we would want to consider, we'd have to discuss it as a campus and as a group.
Thank you, panelists. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chancellor Patterson for a very special ending. Chancellor?
Thank you, Lana. Wait, everyone, don't sign off quite yet. We have something very special that you won't want to miss. You've often heard me say we will persevere. But you ask, how do I know this? I know this because I continuously see how creative and innovative and focused our faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members are in the midst of this crisis. Here is just one excellent example.
Right.